The last class was totally online, so I was engaging with the chat more. So maybe I'm expecting more from the chat than usual. So where are we going with this? Oh yeah, the fourth one. Why does this matter? This one's kind of a harder question. Why is a holy person included in this list? I think we can get old person, sick person, dead person. That makes sense. Inevitable sufferings of life. Holy person? What's he doing there? Let's look it up because I didn't give you a slide with this image. Foresights Buddhism. And I think I saw this one earlier, and it's pretty good. Very dramatic, right? So again, we saw the Hollywood version of this, where this is Keanu Reeves, right? This is the prince, Siddhartha. This is his charioteer. His name's Chandaka. I think they just call him Chana in the Hollywood version. And what do they see? It's sort of abstract and dramatic, but we see somebody getting old, getting sick, and dying, right? The Buddha is sort of clutching his chest. I think he's clutching his chest. Maybe, I don't know. He looks disturbed, right? Why is he disturbed by seeing these things? He'd never seen him before, right? It's sort of a weird story, isn't it? He's been sheltered by his dad, the prophecy thing. We don't have to go over that again. Never seen it before. One way to read this, and I think we kind of started to go on this path last time. One way to read this is that we are all a lot like him. And I would argue this is true, where even though we have an abstract sense, like we might get old, we might get sick, we might die one day, it doesn't really dominate our lives. I don't know about you guys, but that's generally the case for me, even though I teach about this, right? I think about this all the time when I'm teaching, when I'm preparing to teach, and yet it still doesn't really get through to me. And so when we look at the Buddha, he's extremely concerned, we say the Prince Siddhartha, he's extremely concerned. What is he concerned about? I mean, he's sort of curious because he'd never seen it before, like Anthony's saying, but there's more to it than that, right? What is he worried about? He asks the charioteer a question. He's like, what's wrong with those men, remember? And he's like, they're old, they're sick, they're dying. He's like, what does it mean to be old? He says, it happens to us all, right? It's inevitable. And he's like, but wait a minute. This is going to happen to me? And that's the moment that's really trying to be captured here, is this feeling that death is coming for you, right? It's coming for all of us. Death is the big one, right? The other ones are also pretty bad, but death is the big one, is that we will die one day. Do you guys live with an awareness of this? Maybe I'll ask the chat again. Chat, are you aware? Are you aware that you will die one day? You live with this awareness? I guess so. Okay, it looks like we're getting some yeses here. Now, Siddhartha is very concerned. You guys seem pretty chill about it, though, and only until someone asks or talks about it. Yeah, so we live in a time now where we're kind of reminded of death a little more than usual, right? And so please forgive me if I am being annoying or disturbing or something in that way. Death is all around us, right? There are these charts that show, oh yeah, the numbers are down pretty good, right? But if somebody you love dies that day, right, and they're part of those numbers, who cares if the numbers are down, right? Your heart is broken, you miss this person, you wish it didn't happen. These are very disturbing ideas, right? If we take them deep into our hearts and think about how this is going to happen to me, and this is going to happen to you, and everybody you know, and everybody you love, and everything you have come attached to, all of it, you will have to let go one day, right? Either they will leave you and go on to the next world, or you will leave them. And those are the only choices, right? These are the only choices. So all of this is hitting the Buddha right here, and he looks like he's about to have a heart attack. He's very disturbed, but then he sees the holy person, right? So can we make sense of the holy person now? It's almost like you guys, right? I'm trying to freak you out a little bit, and you refuse to be freaked out. You guys are all chill. He's pretty chill. Can you see that? So the Buddha sees the disturbing images, but he's like, but here's somebody who is sitting in front of a dead body and seems kind of relaxed about it, right? How do you do that? How do you not freak out about death and all these other disturbing things that happen? So this is the holy person. So what do you think the Buddha does next? What's the conclusion from these 4 sites? How does it affect the story? Because leading up to this, his father wanted to keep him home, make him become a king so he'll be successful in life. But once the Buddha sees this is all he cares about, is how to solve this problem of suffering, right? It takes over his life. So what does he do is he leaves home. He says, look at this guy. He's figured something out, right? He's figured out how to be peaceful in the face of death. He thinks, all right, I'm going to give that a try too. So he leaves the castle. And of course, that's what his father was concerned about anyway, right? He then goes and practices this meditation. He practices asceticism, which is more than just meditation, I should say. It is extreme discipline. Asceticism. Have you guys heard this term before? We talked about it before, didn't we? In duty, success, pleasure. It's also relevant there. So it shows up again, and it's important to remember too that the life of the Buddha kind of builds from that world, right? It's all ancient India. These stories are kind of developing side by side. And I guess it's worth asking, maybe it's not totally clear, why does he do that? What does discipline have to do with all this stuff? Can you find a connection between these two things? The 4 sites and this discipline thing? Why would discipline help him overcome this fear of death that he's struggling with? What is he looking for with all these discipline practices? Have I asked you about whether you are disciplined? I think if we talked about this before, maybe I've already done this kind of spiel. Yeah, I kind of remember. I think we did go through this before, didn't we? And we talked about athletics. I remember some of the athletes in the room shared the extreme discipline required to be an athlete. So if we already kind of have a background on this term, what does this asceticism do for him? What is he trying to do? Why would this be a path to overcome suffering, to overcome this fear of death?
I think it's gonna help him to take control of his mind, so he won't suffer.
Control. That's a good word. So he wants control of his mind, right? Control of his life. Have you ever heard somebody tell you, like, you can't control everything that happens to you, but you control how you react to it? It's actually very good advice, right? And just like Drissa was saying, that seems to be what he's doing here. Okay, we can't control that we're going to die one day. That's a fact. He figured that out. I think we all understand that to a certain degree. But what we can control is how we respond to death. And what he is doing is, if you think about it, what dies, right? Your body dies, your flesh. This is what gets old. This is what gets sick. This is what I'm going to get a shot in my arm later, right? This is what we need to get these shots into in order to protect ourselves from COVID. If we are not attached to our body, we are not concerned about the welfare of our body, then death isn't so scary anymore, is it? Have you ever heard these phrases like pain is weakness leaving the body, or that pain is temporary but glory lasts forever? Have you heard this sort of stuff? It's like on a poster in a weight room somewhere, right? To be in the weight room requires extreme discipline, right? If you think about it, what are you doing? You're putting yourself through pain. Why the hell would you ever do that? It's because you have some goal, right? You want to control your body, perhaps. You want to control your appearance, perhaps. You want to be healthier, control your health, perhaps, right? To be healthy requires discipline, doesn't it? In addition to weight training and stuff, what else? What other sort of discipline does it require to be healthy? So what? To eat right. Yeah, eating is big. And as you can see here, the Buddha is not eating right. He's eating nothing, it seems. They're eating very little. Okay, so I think this should be pretty clear then. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to find a sense of control, like Grissa said, transcend his body, right? No longer be attached to his body, no longer be concerned about his body, because then if his body dies, he won't even care. But does it work? Does he find what he's looking for? He does not. He does not. And so this story is kind of a critique of some really extreme forms of discipline, extreme forms of asceticism. So what is the opposite? What is the opposite of extreme discipline? Overindulgence. Yeah, exactly. So if we look at this life story of the Buddha and zoom out, that's actually kind of what we have, right? I gave you a cliffhanger last time. We started with life story of the Buddha when he's younger, indulgent, comfortable, pleasant, happy, everything's kind of nice. Second half of his life, extreme in the other side, extreme discipline. Can you relate to this? Have you ever had a weekend where you're having a good time and hanging out with your friends and sort of indulging a bit more, and then all of a sudden Monday rolls around, you're like, oh crap, I got to get this assignment in and do all this homework, and then you get really disciplined and really strict on yourself, and then you do that for a few days, then you get sort of burnt out and tired, you got to go back to the, so, all right, I need to take a break and have a little vacation. This is just like every week of my life, right? You know, COVID is hard because there's not as much room for indulgence. There's not as much, you can't go to as many bars or restaurants. You can't go out to a show or to do whatever it is that you like to do. It's harder to indulge, but in a way, this is our lives, right? It's oscillating between these two extremes. Do this until I can't do it anymore, and then do this until I can't do it anymore, and then do this until I can't do it anymore, and bouncing back and forth. Now, what the Buddha is promoting is what he calls a middle way. So hopefully it's clear. Again, if you think about middle, it's between two things, right? Hopefully it's clear. It's the middle between indulgence and discipline, right? We could say asceticism and maybe hedonism is another word. You don't have to know that word. It's too many words. But asceticism is a word I want you to know. And so the Buddha promotes this middle way. Now, what's confusing is he doesn't really tell you how far to each side you should go. Like a little bit of indulgence and a lot of asceticism, or a little bit of asceticism, a lot of indulgence. It's kind of up to you to figure out, in fact. But what he is saying is that the extremes are bad, right? Extreme discipline, you're going to burn yourself out. Extreme indulgence, you're going to be unhealthy or have other various problems associated with that too. Okay, hopefully that's pretty clear. Questions about this? Okay, and then of course, eventually he achieves enlightenment. I think when I pre-recorded the lecture, I told you we could watch this video together. So why don't we just watch this? It helps sort of illustrate the details of this story. Let me pause it real quick. Record again. There's a sense that Buddhas can remember the past lives of themselves and others. What do I need? This one. They can see, for example, maybe I was a monkey in a past life, and so he can see that I used to be a monkey, and he knows the future too, clairvoyance, and this total eradication of negative emotions. So maybe you saw in the Hollywood version, you had the beautiful daughters. In this version here, this is a 1,000-year-old cave painting. You still have these daughters of Mara. They're much more kind of modestly dressed than in the Hollywood version, maybe no surprise there. And he's still being attacked by all these violent demons. Can you see the violent demons and their weapons and stuff? There's one up here I want to show you. Can you tell what he's doing, this guy? What weapon is he using? Actually, you can see pretty well on there. So if you can't tell, it's a metal shaft with a wooden handle and some kind of fire coming out at the end of it. What kind of weapon does that? It's a gun. So again, 1,000-year-old cave painting, one of the earliest pictures of a gun. As far as I know, I'm not an expert of gun history, but it's definitely a very early depiction of a gun. Yeah. So pretty cool. And maybe you already knew this, but gunpowder was developed in China, or at least in East Asia, traveled kind of along the Silk Road, so they say. So here's an example of one. So yeah, after he achieves enlightenment, after he becomes the Buddha, then he wanders around and teaches people and forms the early Buddhist community. And then it is the end of his life. And so finally, you come to his death. Maybe we can look at this picture too. Here's an early depiction of the Buddha dying. If he's ever lying on his side like this, maybe you've seen a picture of him like this, maybe not. I remember Street Fighter 2 when I was a kid. You guys have played Street Fighter? Classic Super Nintendo game. There's a Buddha who's lying down like this in the background in one level. And so that is this scene. Whenever the Buddha is lying down, it means he is getting ready to die. Here are his final words. And you know, whenever you watch a movie and the main character or any major character is getting ready to die, the final words are always important, right? That's when they like lay down the main teaching or something, and that's what's happening here. So the Buddha says in the first part, decay is inherent in all things. So we've sort of talked about this, haven't we? What do you think he means by that? Decay is inherent in all things. Nothing lasts forever. Death, right? It's coming. So he's saying it here, and he's expanding it even beyond us, right? To all the other things we love. My computer, my phone, all my other fun things, they'll get lost or broken or stolen. They will end. They have to, right? Everything comes to an end, exactly. Another way to put it is impermanence. Nothing is permanent, right? The opposite of permanent. Is a permanent marker permanent? Why not? The marker itself will get destroyed. Let's say I write something hilarious. Let's say I get a tattoo. Is a tattoo permanent? Why not? Oh, because I'm not permanent. Maybe it's permanent for me, but my skin will not be here forever, right? So even a permanent tattoo is not permanent, exactly. So the Buddha's coming out and saying everything is impermanent. That should be pretty clear by now. We've talked about it a lot. This part maybe is not so clear. Strive with clarity of mind. Can anybody make sense of this off the bat? If not, we can build up to it. But if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear it. What do you think he means? Be sure to strive with clarity of mind. And these are related, right? Everything's impermanent. Be sure to strive with clarity of mind. Thoughts on clarity of mind? You guys have clarity of mind? Pretty clear-minded, yeah? On a good day? On a good day. Chat, you guys clear-minded there? I can't tell how clear the minds are in the chat. I'm going to assume they're clear. Okay, maybe we can come back to this idea after we fill out some more information on the Buddhist teachings. So, in a word, what he's talking about here is karma. But that doesn't really answer the question very well, does it? So, you've probably heard of karma before. You guys ever hear about karma? What does karma mean to you when you hear that word? Goes around, comes around. That's sort of a classic way to think about it. I do good stuff comes back. I do bad stuff comes back. You don't really have to think about why necessarily, right? It's like just does. Some people might talk about the universe, right? Have you ever heard about that? The universe sends good vibes back or something. With Buddhism, it's a little different actually. This word karma comes from Buddhism in a lot of ways, but it's a little different. An important difference is multiple lives, okay? Reincarnation. I would argue without multiple lives, karma kind of doesn't work. Would you guys agree with me? Why doesn't it work?
Well, because if you're overall a bad person, nothing bad can come back to you when you die because you just did that.
And then you're just gone, right? And there's no real consequences. Maybe like if you're committing crimes and you get caught, maybe you'll see the consequences, but maybe you won't, right? Some people commit crimes and they don't get caught, and then they seem to get away without any consequences. So the single life perspective doesn't really work for karma. We want it to work. We want to live in a society where I do good stuff, I'll be rewarded. I do bad stuff, I'll be punished. That's how it's presented to us. That's how I run my class, right? You guys do good stuff, I will reward you. You do bad stuff, I'll punish you. That's how we're kind of brought up. But in reality, it doesn't always work that way, right? One life is too short, and the consequences of everything we do don't get felt. So if we put it in the context of multiple lives, and this is called samsara or cyclic existence. What does that mean? It's this big wheel of lives. We're going around and around and around and around. Here, we can zoom in on it. If we are humans in this life and we do bad stuff, maybe we won't be humans in the next life, right? We could be reborn as a bug, which is a type of animal, according to this. We could go to hell. And I think if you listen to the YouTube video I recorded, I went into details about all these, so maybe we can kind of skip over this part. I also talked a bit about karma, which is why I deleted those slides. So in any case, karma kind of needs reincarnation to make any sense. But once you do have it, once you do have this sense of multiple lives without beginning or end, and this is kind of a key point. Maybe I won't write on the board, but I'll just talk about it. Lives that continue into the future. So if we're reborn in heaven, right, with the gods, then we're gods for a long time, but we're not going to be gods forever, right? And then you're reborn again, and maybe you'll go to hell, just like in Catholicism, but you won't be in hell forever either. Even hell is impermanent, right? According to this, everything's impermanent. And so there's a sense in both directions, time continues infinitely. So that means how many lives do we have? If time is infinite, how many lives do we have? Math majors?
We also have infinite life.
Yes, infinite lives, exactly. And if you think about it, infinite lives means infinite experiences, activities. You know, if we have our very limited one life, we could look at somebody who is in jail and we can say that person's bad because they're in jail. They broke the law and they're bad, but I'm good because I never break the law, right? It's very easy to think that way. If you step into this world, though, have I ever broken the law according to this infinite life perspective? I must have, right? I'm not a math major, but I think when things are infinite, that means I've done everything, right? Everything, horrible things that I won't even disturb you by saying. But there's a bit more sense of interconnection, right? Even horrible people were once good people. Even good people were once horrible people. And in the future, will probably be horrible again, or maybe good again. Men were once women, right? With infinite lives. We were all every gender. We were all every species, right? All these different animals. We were all in hell, experiencing horrible things, ghosts, gods, titans. So it challenges your kind of bounded sense of self, right? That I'm Bill and I'm here and I will always just be Bill and I'll always be here. This exercise, and you can just treat it as like an imagination game or something. What if it were this way? But it challenges your groundedness, that I'm just here and I will always be here. Okay, and of course, what decides this movement? We've already said it, but it is karma. Maybe, how much time we got? 25 minutes? Yeah, that's actually a pretty good amount of time. So why don't we get to the Four Noble Truths? I think I kind of punted on this in the YouTube video and said I would explain it later. So let's explain it now. And hopefully we can maybe even start some new stuff before time is up. So, okay. Four Noble Truths. The first truth is suffering. I've kind of already gone into a lot of detail on that, so I was planning to skip the slide for that one. What sort of suffering have we talked about today? What were the sufferings that the Buddha saw in the life story of the Buddha? Yeah, old age, sickness, and death. So those are three good examples. There are a bunch of other examples. This isn't the only kind of suffering, but this is what really kind of like hits home, right? Because this is the hardest one, right? When people die, even if it's not you, hurts. It hurts real bad, right? And when you die, that's probably the scariest damn thing I can imagine, right? I know there are probably people more brave than me out there, but I'm scared of getting this shot later today. I'm not looking forward to that. Imagine dying, right? What if you knew you were going to die later today, right? That would just that would very much transform the day. Let's just put it that way. So the truth of suffering, the Buddha had this realization as a young man. The harder one, and if he leaves you hanging with just this truth of suffering, it's not a very nice trick to play on somebody. The harder one is, why does it happen? And this might be sort of a familiar idea, because I think Buddhist ideas are actually very familiar to our American society, whether we realize it or not. What does he blame it on? He says this. He says it is thirst or craving. Thirst or craving. So we could call them unwholesome desires. Thirst or craving, which gives rise to rebirth, which seeks fresh pleasure here and now there. Sorry, now here and now there, in the form of thirst for sensual pleasure, thirst for existence, thirst for non-existence. So the Buddha, what is he saying? He's saying this suffering, it is caused by these unwholesome desires, right? That's what causes us to be reborn. That's what causes us to do stupid things. Stupid things lead to stupid consequences, and we get in trouble and have to experience the results of our stupid actions. So sometimes we thirst for sensual pleasure. That one should be pretty clear, pretty familiar, right? Is we want to eat things that taste good, we want to feel things that feel good, right? And the Buddha is saying that actually gets us in trouble. Thirst for existence, it's a weird way of saying something that you probably can understand pretty easily, is wanting something, right? Wanting a person, wanting a thing, wanting a feeling, wanting a job. I guess feeling is probably more the sensual pleasure thing, but wanting a job, wanting status, wanting people to treat you in a certain way, right? What about this one? Thirst for non-existence. You guys ever want things to not exist? What things do you not want to exist? COVID. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Yeah, exactly. So that illustrates it pretty nicely. There's somewhere deep in my heart where I just don't want to be in this goddamn lockdown situation anymore, and I imagine you guys feel the same way. So all of these come together and lead to a sense of suffering, is what the Buddha is arguing. Now, one important point is the Buddha. I won't even phrase that as a question. The Buddha is not saying all desires are bad, right? There are some good desires, right? Wholesome desires is even a word for it. You don't have to know that word, but there are some wholesome desires. Can you think of an example of a wholesome desire? What we could call a desire that does not lead to suffering, a good desire? As you think about it, this is what Kyon says. He says, wrong desires restrict and fetter, right desires enhance and liberate, which is kind of an interesting way of putting it. So what's a wholesome desire? What do you think? Chat? Wholesome desires? You guys have wholesome desires? That's a great one, right? If you see very clearly you can help somebody carry something or give them something or whatever, give them, do a favor for them. That's great, right? Wanting to help somebody, that's a beautiful thing. What about wholesome selfish desires? Are there wholesome things you can do for yourself? I feel like we're often told not to be selfish, or at least that's my feeling, is that selfish is bad somehow, right? Can you ever be? Is there a wholesome selfish desire, wanting things for yourself that are wholesome? What's wrong with that? Right? Nothing wrong with that. A better life for yourself. Sometimes it comes down to the details. Like if somebody's like, I don't know, selling cocaine or something like that, I just want a better life for myself, right? It's like, well, that's not so wholesome. But yeah, how do you get a better life for yourself? Maybe something relevant for us. You want to do well in this class, right? Is that so bad? Isn't that pretty wholesome? I think that's pretty wholesome, wanting to learn things and do well in this class. I'd say that's very wholesome, in fact. Now, if it's like, it's kind of tied up with these anxieties, like I want to get a good grade so I can get a good GPA, so I can get a good job, so I can make a bunch of money, so I can just do all these other things at the top here, then all of a sudden it gets a little bit mixed up, right? But if you want to learn stuff, you want to grow, you want to improve, you want to be able to explore and understand the world, right? Those are all wonderful desires. So in the end, as you can tell, these are very general terms, and it's a little hard to get a clear handle on, what's the difference between these kind of negative, unwholesome craving thirsts and more wholesome desires. And it sort of takes us back to here, right? This idea of striving with clarity of mind. Can we make sense of this now? So strive, he's just talking about how should you live your life, right? Strive means to try hard, right? So what should you try to do? What is this clarity of mind? What are we being clear about? What are we paying attention to? What are we paying attention to here? Of negative desires? Yeah. Putting it another way, it's just, let's say, I do a thing, right? I don't know, I drink 3 cups of coffee before class because I want to pay attention, right? This is saying keep clarity of mind in the sense of pay attention to what the consequences of that are, right? How does that make your tummy feel? How does that make your body feel? How does that make your mind feel? Are you all jittery, messed up? Or do you feel kind of fine, right? And so it's just asking you to pay attention to the actions you make, right? And the consequences that come directly from them. So it could be what you eat, it could be what you do, it could be what you say, right? A lot of the time when we communicate on these things, I don't know if you guys have this experience, but sometimes I text with people and I don't know what they're talking about, right? Or I send something to them and I think they interpret it one way, but it's hard to really tell. I mean, obviously we're having class like this, right? I don't even know how people in the chat are responding to what I'm talking about for class. It's hard to communicate this way. It's hard to tell how our speech affects others, and yet it does, right? You get a mean message on Twitter, you get a mean comment on Instagram or whatever, that can kind of mess with you. I don't know, maybe you guys are more mature than I am or something, right? But I'm very sensitive to these things. If somebody says something mean to me on the internet, I'm like, oh, that was mean. That hurts my feelings, right? And if you're actually in front of somebody and they see your feelings get hurt, it's a very different experience, right? It's much easier to be mean over the internet. You guys agree with me? Yeah, so it's this kind of paying attention that the Buddha is encouraging us to do in his final words, is that we should pay attention not only to, our karmic moral actions, but also pay attention to the fact that everything is impermanent. Why don't we think about, now that we know all of this, right? Now that we know all these Buddhist teachings, we still do have a pretty good amount of time. Let's look at this image, right? So we've got the Buddha lying down here. How do you think these guys are feeling? Maybe I'll phrase this a little bit. How do you think Buddhists should respond to death? And this is should, right? This is just sort of theoretical. What do you think? What is the proper Buddhist response to death? To welcome it? Yeah, why do you say that? Yeah, and logically speaking, that makes sense, right? That's exactly what the Buddha's teaching, isn't he? He's talking about impermanence, decay is inherent in all things. We should expect that. But if we look carefully at this scene, is that what's going on? Like, what are these guys doing? Can you tell what they're doing? How do you think he's feeling?
They're kind of disappointed or surprised.
Disappointed, surprised? They're mourning. Yeah, he's tearing his hair out. So it's a little bit of a disconnect here. I totally agree with Anthony. I sort of set him up when I posed that question as the should, right? You expect Buddhists to kind of be okay with death, right? You might think the Buddhist response to COVID would be like, oh, it happens. It's just another change. Everything changes. No big deal, right? But one thing I want to remind you is death is hard, even for these like very famous Buddhist students, the close disciples of the Buddha who studied directly with him and had all the best teachings, that sort of stuff. They are very sad to see their teacher go. And that is a part of life, right? Buddhists are not telling you to not be sad. In fact, that's sort of I would argue, an American thing, right? Where you got to sort of toughen up and stiffen your upper lip and whatever, right? be a man, that kind of thing. But these guys are sad, right? Because death is sad. It is a fact. Death is sad. To lose somebody is sad. The fact that we get sick is sad. The fact that we get old is sad. All these things are sad. The fact that there's suffering in the world is sad. And that will never not be sad. It will always be sad. So I encourage you, just like this guy, he's looking at his teacher dying and his heart is ripping in half. That's an important feeling to have. It's important to let yourself have that feeling. But at the same time, these tools are helpful, right? As you are having your heart rip in half, you can remind yourself that, oh yeah, this does happen. This shouldn't be a surprise. This does happen. I knew this was going to happen, and yet I am surprised, right? And so it's almost like this again, bouncing between extremes and trying to find this middle way where you let yourself feel the pain, but at the same time know tools to deal with the pain. At least that's what's being recommended here. And of course, the Buddha's final teaching is his own death, right? He's showing that everything comes to an end with his own body. So anyways, coming back to this, we kind of can answer that question, right, of striving with clarity of mind, is trying to differentiate between these two things. The Buddha is not necessarily going to tell you exactly how to live your life. It's just, here are some tools. Middle way is a tool. Differentiating positive and negative actions, another tool. Okay, I went over some other details of the Four Noble Truths before, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. The path, the Eightfold Path, and again, they're listed out here. These are areas where the Buddha kind of is recommending this middle way, right? He's basically saying, don't be too extreme when it comes to the way you look at the world, your understanding of the world, your resolve, your motivation for doing the things that you do, the way that you speak, right? Maybe not too harshly, not too, you don't want to suck up to people. You just want to be sort of straightforward and honest, that kind of thing. Livelihood is sort of an interesting one. What's a livelihood? You guys have a livelihood? Yeah, it's basically your job, right? And arguably that is your job, is to be a student. And we could say it's a profession. How do you think Buddhists would feel about like a fisherman, someone who fishes for a living? Would Buddhists would a Buddhist say being a fisherman is the right livelihood? Feeding people is good, that's true. Are you not hurting anyone though? How do Buddhists feel about fish? Buddhists like the fish, don't they? Theoretically, right? You start to get into cultural things here. It's actually much more complicated. There are Buddhist fishermen. I don't want to give you the wrong information. But if your job is to kill things, there's a sense that that's kind of sinful, right? Even if it's an animal. So there are a lot of Buddhist vegetarians, not exclusively, right? You get into some societies, like for example, Tibet is a very interesting one. That's the one I know the most about. It's hard to be a vegetarian there, right? Because it's high elevation, not as many vegetables, lots of yaks and various animals that people live off of, yak milk and cheese and that sort of stuff. But if you don't eat meat, it's hard to find other nutritious things to eat. So this is a complicated one. How do you have a good livelihood in this world of ours, right? Where inevitably to make money, you got to sort of, do what you got to do, so to speak, right? So it's an interesting one, and I'm glad, that the Buddhists included it here. It's something that is worth thinking about. Is how does my livelihood affect the world? But it's also important to keep in mind, nobody's perfect, right? The suffering is assumed. It's not like we get surprised and we say, oh, it's their fault. They're doing bad stuff. That's why we're suffering. The Buddhists kind of are like, yeah, the world sucks. That is a fact, right? It's up to us to figure out how to deal with the fact that it sucks so bad, but it really does suck. There is this suffering that is inevitable, going to come, right? That was the Buddha's big realization. Oh, crap, suffering is coming, right? So to choose a livelihood that is best is maybe the key here, a middle way, right? You can't have a totally purely good all the time sort of livelihood. Even my livelihood, I feel very sort of propped up because I'm a teacher and I'm teaching you guys things and you're all learning and whatever. But I do it for the paycheck for sure, right? If I didn't get paid, I wouldn't teach, right? Why would I? And so I'm part of the machine just like everybody else. I might have some people kind of in the background working the gears a little bit for me. I can fool myself into thinking I'm so virtuous or whatever. But, at the end of the day, there are many financial transactions happening at Manhattan College, as we all know. So anyways, these can be broken down into wisdom, morality, meditation. That's one way to think about it. I'm not going to force you to memorize the Eightfold Path. I just want you to know that there is this sense of, just how to live your life, right? And it is based on these other noble truths. So again, what are the Four Noble Truths? There's suffering in the world, right? There's that first one. Second one, where does it come from, right? What's the cause of the suffering? The third one, which I didn't even give you a slide for it because it's in the video, is the end, right? Cessation, the fact that suffering can be finished, right? Again, we were talking the world sort of sucks, there's suffering in the world. It's not a given that you can end this suffering, but the Buddha is saying you can. And then the fourth is telling you how, right? It's the path. People compare this to a doctor's diagnosis, right? You can get sick. You have to wonder what is the cause of my sickness. If you treat the cause of the sickness, then you can end the sickness. And so then there's a path to do it. It's very logical, very rational, one might say. You don't have to buy into it, of course, but I think you can appreciate the logic of it, though, right? It's sort of good problem solving, whether you agree with it, with the details or not. Okay, well, that's basically the Four Noble Truths. Any questions about this? We actually got through that with a little time to spare. Questions in the chat? So that, this is a nice thing for exams. For example, we got all these lists. I can ask you to apply some of the ideas from the Four Noble Truths, from the life story of the Buddha, see how they kind of fit together, right? There are a lot of things we could do with that. So if you don't understand anything, feel free to ask a question. If you do, we can keep rolling forward. So again, kind of lots of lecture today, and I apologize if it's a little overwhelming. On Thursday, after we listen to the podcast, we can discuss this stuff more thoroughly. Here is how kind of Buddhism maps into the world today. There are these what are called three vehicles, which might sound like a bit of a weird term. It's kind of directly translating the Sanskrit word. The chapter we read used this term Mahayana a lot, and yana just means vehicle, and Maha means great. So Mahayana is the greater vehicle. We're not going to talk about all of these, but this is just sort of a intro overview that Buddhism exists in the world today, mostly in East and Central Asia, Southeast Asia as well. You might notice that India is gray here, right? And I told you that the Buddha was born and kind of mostly taught in India. So what do you think this means here? Why do you think India is gray on this map? Yes, it disappears. It sort of gets pushed out by Hinduism. It sort of merges with Hinduism too. And actually, because we read the Ramayana, we can understand this pretty well, right? Remember, we've got Vishnu and Rama is his avatar. So something that Hindus start to say is that Buddha was also Vishnu's avatar. Can you see the sort of the power in that, right? Because then even if the Hindus say, yeah, the Buddha's great teachings, great stuff, but he's still sort of ours, right? He's part of our tradition. It's very, let's say, encompassing. You can really pull in a lot of things with this avatar concept, right? And so that's what a lot of Hindus do. They don't even say the Buddha was wrong. They say he was great, but he was just still part of Hinduism. And so fast forward, time goes by. There's another religion that comes to South Asia. Islam, yeah, exactly. And so those are the two real major religions of India. There are others as well. Sikhism, have you heard of Sikhs before, right? So other major religions too. India is very religiously interesting, but Buddhism kind of dies out. It kind of disappears. But it lives on in these other places, particularly, well, the history of Buddhism in China is complicated. It's definitely still there though. Tibet, I've mentioned, here's Tibet, is this orange color. Here's Mongolia up at the top. There, this other kind of Buddhism that we won't really talk about in this class, but we could in another. I teach a whole course on Buddhism and we talk about all these things. And then I took Japan out because I wanted to zoom in, but Japan's over here. That would also be this yellow color. So, we'll have this podcast, which is about a Japanese Buddhist. And so that's really this greater vehicle, which we're turning to right now. Maybe we can use that to review. So let's start with the Bodhisattva. I think we can cover this in the next few minutes, and then we'll start with the rest of the stuff next time. So this is maybe a new word. Has anybody heard the word before? Bodhisattva? This is a good word. So Bodhi means enlightenment, right? Enlightenment, Bodhi. Sattva means being. It's an enlightenment being. So one way you can think about it is it's a person, a being, right? Because again, it's not even just people in the Buddhist world. It's a being on the path to enlightenment. So before the Buddha was the Buddha, he was a bodhisattva. And so maybe we'll use the board for this. Let's see, I'll get this situated so you can see it. There we go. So you can think about the path to enlightenment like this, right? At the top, you have the Buddha. And at the bottom, there's us, right? For early Buddhism, we're down here, the Buddha's up there. We're kind of lost and confused. The Buddha is really great and enlightened, right? And there's sort of a big gap that separates us. This later development, and that becomes very popular in East Asia, is that we have a little more access to enlightenment. And you'll see this in the poetry that I'm going to ask you to write about later in the week. In fact, there's this path that links us to Buddhahood, rather than just us being these unenlightened disciples of the Buddha who are so far away from him. All of a sudden, this idea, the Bodhisattva, links everything in between. So someone who is in this space between the very unenlightened people and full enlightenment would be called a bodhisattva, right? And there are all these steps. There are 10 of them. And so if, for example, if you wanted to be a bodhisattva, you could become one, right? There's a vow. Did I write about a vow here? Yeah, so there's this vow to save all beings from suffering. So if you want to take that first step, you basically make a vow and say, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to help all beings. I'm going to relieve them of suffering. I'm going to take this first step on the bodhisattva path. You're still basically a regular person, but you are trying to move toward enlightenment, right? To achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then there are various steps you can keep taking and keep getting better and keep learning more. It's kind of this evolutionary track. And as you move up, you will kind of gain knowledge, enlightenment. You can think about the Eightfold Path is sort of true, but it kind of gets replaced by these other values as well. And then finally, somebody gets to this step all the way, the last step right before becoming a Buddha, but there's a certain kind of bodhisattva who stops here. Why do you think they would stop here? Yeah, very good, exactly. Yeah, so that is this sort of figure here. So I've got a picture of who I'm calling Guan Yin. So that, maybe I'll write in the chat, Guan Yin is the Chinese name of this bodhisattva. So there's some bodhisattvas who are very advanced. They're basically Buddhas. They're basically already there. And if you couldn't hear him, Anthony rightly pointed out that they stop here because they want to help teach everybody else. Once you pass over this step, you become a Buddha and you're gone, right? Just like Keanu Reeves disappeared, right? There's a sense that the Buddha is gone. Doesn't mean he has absolutely nothing to do with the world anymore, but he's not in the world. He's not, going around in circles like all of us are, but a bodhisattva is. And so there's a sense that there are these bodhisattvas who still reincarnate, still take on human forms, can teach us, can kind of go along with us in this world. And one very famous one is this bodhisattva of compassion. So one thing you'll see is this compassionate motivation to try to teach people, help people, liberate them from suffering. That's a big part of the podcast that we will watch. And that's one reason why I want to bring this up. And this figure, Guanyin, becomes extremely famous for compassion, right? For trying to help other beings. It's not to say compassion was absent from that first life story of the Buddha, but he was mostly concerned about himself, right? He wanted to achieve enlightenment for himself. And there's nothing wrong with that. As we said, that is a wholesome motivation to try to end suffering for yourself. But with these bodhisattvas, there's a new emphasis on compassion, to really do everything for other people, everything you can, try to help other people. The other big emphasis is wisdom, which I think we should hold off for next time. So why don't we call it there? We've covered a ton of stuff, and I feel like I've probably already overloaded you guys with information. So we can end it, I guess only 1 minute anyway. End a minute early. Any questions on all of that? We can start with the greater vehicle again next time. I know we're a little bit behind